Hi, this is Jim of Shiloh Kahal, and I'm going to do a bit of a study here on Jeremiah chapters 29 through 31. And I'll be reading this with commentary, and just as a way of heads up here, um, the time of Jeremiah, this time of Jeremiah is at the time that Yehuda has been taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, and so there are peoples there. It's also the time when, well, and let me also say Yekanya. You're going to see, and you can see it on the screen here in verse 2. Yekanya is actually known also as, in most of our modern translations, as Jehoiachin. He is one of the kings he is the king that was taken off to Babel with the people during the exile and was replaced by Tzidkiyahu, or the modern translations will call Zedekiah. So just a little background here, and this might be a little choppy, and I'm sorry because I need to explain as I go, but let me also some heads up. I'm reading from the Yah scriptures, and so we're going to have names and words that are a little different than common translations, and I'll try to explain that when I think it seems appropriate. Also, if you are not terribly familiar with Isaiah and Zechariah and Joel and um, Ezekiel and some of the other prophets, some of these things that are referenced here in Jeremiah, you may not be familiar with. Things such as Mount Zion. This is Jerusalem. Now, there was a Zion that existed. There was a Mount Zion that existed in those days, but it was just a small Mount Zion. It was an important place, just like Jerusalem or Jerusalem is an unimportant place. But it's not to be confused with the New Jerusalem that is coming down, or the Mount Zion that is coming down, the Kodesh mountain. And Kodesh, by the way, and I love the word because it is it's an English rendering of the Hebrew word that a lot of scriptures will call holy, or the modern scriptures will use the term holy. Um, the scriptures use the word set apart, but the Yah scriptures and the Hallelujah scriptures use the word Kodesh, which just means set apart. And you'll also hear all the time, and I'll just give you a little heads up there, Nabi, Nabiim. These are prophets. These are, where you hear me say Nabi, think prophet. When you hear Barak, that means to bless. Barak is to bless. Baruch is to be blessed or blessed. Baruch. So you're going to see Baruch, Barakah, and these are all words for blessing as a heads up. And I also want to explain in 29, before I get going here, that this is at the time that they are have been taken off to Babel. We have exiles in Babylon. And they are going to be coming back. They are what you would call scattered. Now, they didn't all get scattered, but many of them got scattered and removed or exiled to Babel. And they will be brought back. They will be gathered back into the land. If you've seen my video where I was trying to differentiate between the various gatherings, the scatterings, and then the various gatherings of Israel and Yehuda, you would know that there are some gatherings, but then there is the gathering, which is the end time gathering. And through this, I will be trying to show you the how you will be able to differentiate which gathering they're talking about, because across these three chapters, we will have Jeremiah referring to, or Yirmiyahu. You may hear me say I'm sorry, because I will be probably bouncing back and forth between names like Jeremiah and Yirmiyahu. I like to say Yirmiyahu, but we know him as Jeremiah in modern translations. But we're going to be bouncing back and forth between the gatherings, and I'm going to try to differentiate for you. And the way you would not know how to differentiate if all you did was a cursory reading of Jeremiah. You have to understand the promise of the promised land. You have to understand what has been promised to us and what is coming. You have to understand the differences of, what is the real promises, the new Jerusalem that comes down, the promised land, and the new covenant that we are going to be living in when that time comes, and how it's different than anything we've ever seen, let alone what they experienced when they came back from Babylon. So let me go ahead and get started here. So we'll start in verse 29 of Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah. And these are the words of the letter which Yirmiyahu, the Nabi, the prophet, sent from Jerusalem, which is Jerusalem, to the rest of the elders of the exile. So the elders have already been exiled. And I think they're going to tell us here in a minute who all was exiled. And to the Kohanim, which is the priest. This is the priesthood. This is plural for priest. And to the Nebiim, which is plural for the prophets, and to all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had exiled from Jerusalem to Babel, or Babylon. After Yekoniah, also known as Yekoniyahu, and in modern translations, Jehoiachin, the sovereign and the sovereigness' mother, and the eunuchs, and the heads of Yehuda and Jerusalem, and the craftsmen and the smiths had gone from Jerusalem. So this is what this is the after the death of who was it? It was Jehoiakim, that had been in power for 9 years and was in power when Nebuchadnezzar came on the scene. There's a story, and I've done it elsewhere. But Yekoniah is the first son to follow Jehoiakim, or Jehoiakim, the first son to follow, but he was only in charge for 3 months. He only lasted 3 months because he followed the instructions of Yirmiyahu, which was to basically do not put up the resistance, go with Nebuchadnezzar to Babel and pray for the peace of Babel, because when Babel has peace, you will have peace. So Yekoniah actually followed the instructions of Jeremiah, or Yirmiyahu, and went, gathered up all his people, and they all went to Babylon. And what was left in his stead then was Sidkiyahu, or the modern translations will call him Zedekiah, who was also a son of Jehoiakim, or Jehoiakim, according to modern translations. Zedekiah was also, or Sidkiyahu was also a son of Jehoiakim, but he wasn't the original one placed in power. And just as a little heads up, it's Yekoniah, who is in the lineage of Messiah, that we're seeing referenced here in verse 2. And it's Yekoniah that the successor to Nebuchadnezzar raises up and treats very well, and he ends up sitting with the kings in his latter years. So he was treated well. So after Yekoniah the sovereign, and the sovereigness' mother, and the eunuchs, and the heads of Yehuda and Jerusalem, and the craftsmen and the smiths had gone from Jerusalem. Let me also say that Yehuda is the southern lands, the heads of what in our modern translations we're calling Judah, but it's Yehuda in this version. And you may also hear the people of Yehuda referred to as Yehudim. And later, in the time of Messiah, you hear really most of the Israelites referred to as Yehudim, because that's who was primarily in the land, because Yisrael remained scattered at that time. So the predominant grouping of people in the lands of Messiah were the Yehudim, the people of Yehuda, which would primarily be the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and the half tribe of Levi, and probably some Seminites. But okay, and the heads of Yehuda and Jerusalem, and the craftsmen and the smiths had gone from Jerusalem by the hand of Elisha, son of Shaphan, and Gemariah, the son of Hilkiah, whom Sidkiyahu, sovereign of Yehuda, sent to Babel, to Nebuchadnezzar, the sovereign of Babel, saying, Thus said Yahuwah of hosts, Elohim, which is basically God. We don't want to use the word God, but Elohim of Yisrael, the God of Yisrael, to all the exiles whom I exiled from Jerusalem to Babel. So Yahuwah says he exiled them from Jerusalem to Babel. And he's telling them, build houses and dwell, plant gardens and eat their fruit, take wives and bring forth sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands and let them bear sons and daughters, and be increased there and not diminished, and seek the peace of the city where I have exiled you, and pray to Yahweh for it, for in its peace you have peace. For thus said Yahweh of hosts, Elohim of Yisrael, let not your Nebiim and your diviners who are in your midst deceive you, neither listen to the dreams which you are dreaming. For they, Nabah, or prophesy falsely to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares Yahweh. For thus said Yahweh, when 70 years are completed, at Babel I shall visit you and establish my good word toward you, to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I am planning for you, declares Yahweh, plans of peace and not of evil, to give you an expectancy and a latter end. Then you shall call on me and shall come and pray to me, and I shall listen to you. And you shall seek and shall find me when you search for me with all your heart. And I shall be found by you, declares Yahweh, and I shall turn back your captivity and shall gather you from all the Gentiles, from all the places where I have driven you, declares Yahweh, and I shall bring you back to the place from which I have exiled you. Let me go back up here, because this is both a near and far prophetic utterance, because he's telling them, and this is what Daniel later sees, that after 70 years, he's going to visit them and establish a good word towards them, and then bring them back to this place. So they will be gathered, those who, and turns out they didn't all come back, but many of them come back from Babel and are gathered to this place, back to this place. And so this starting in verse 11, this prophetic utterance is for that time, but it's also for the gathering that will take place in when the day of Yahweh comes, which you'll see referenced in a little bit here. So what we're seeing in verses 11 through 14, this is a near and far prophetic utterance. This is for those who are going to be brought back from Babel, but it's also for those who are brought back in the end of times when they're gathered, because they're all scattered once again. If you know history, they're out there still, and they have yet to be regathered in the gathering, but they will be. And this prophetic utterance is true of them also. And I'll just read it again. For I know the plans I am planning for you, declares Yahweh, plans of peace and not of evil, to give you an expectancy and a latter end. Well, let me just comment to that. Plans of peace, they did not experience that, not to a real extent. When they came back from Babylon, they immediately met up with the Shomeronites or the Samaritans and just people of the land. There was always unrest. They were always having problems. They never really, even though they built the temple and they did bring the priesthood back, they'd never really experienced peace. They were always under Persia's influence at the time. And I suppose in a way, Persia did provide them some peace during that time, but they didn't have peace because they had unrest in the land all around them. And then Greece came in, and brought terrible things during the period of, maybe 200 BC to the, through the times of the Maccabees. And then from the Maccabees forward, you have the Romans who are influencing. So they just didn't experience that peace then. Maybe some peace, but not the peace. That's how we know they're talking of the end time gathering as well, because when the end time gathering comes, from then on out, we will have peace forever. Plans of peace and not of evil, to give you an expectancy and a latter end, to give them hope and a latter end, hope for the end of what they're going to be dealing with. And there are so many references. You're going to get this in Deuteronomy 30, but it's just all over the place in the prophetic utterances. Then you shall call on me and shall come and pray to me, and I shall listen to you, and you shall seek and find me when you search for me with all your heart. And I shall be found by you, declares Yahweh, and I shall turn back your captivity and shall gather you from all the Gentiles, from all the places where I've driven you, declares Yahweh, and I shall bring you back to the place from which I have back to the place from which I have exiled you. This scripture, this whole calling on him with all our hearts, and then he goes and gathers us. He answers that call, and he gathers us and brings us from all the places where he scattered us back into the land. Well, this is not just in Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah here. This is scattered everywhere. You're going to read it starting in Deuteronomy, but actually you go back to Jubilees. You read it in Jubilees. You're going to read it in Isaiah. You're going to read it in Ezekiel. You read, this is such a common theme everywhere throughout the prophets of Yahuwah. Okay. So I'll finish up that thought. This has near and far prophetic value, because they are coming back from Babel in 70 years as well to the land and will be gathered. Okay, so in verse 15, because you have said, Yahuwah has raised up Nebiim for us in Babel. Thus said Yahuwah concerning the sovereign who sits on the throne of David, concerning all the people who dwell in the city, and concerning your brothers who have not gone out with you into exile. Well, a couple thoughts. He's referring to Babel here. Because you've said Yahuwah has raised up Nebiim for us in Babel. Then he goes on in verse 16 to say, thus says Yahuwah concerning the sovereign who sits on the throne of David. Well, who sits on the throne of David at the time? Well, it was Jehoiakim who died, and then we had Jehoiakim, or Yekaniah is what he's also called, who followed him, but was removed from that throne 3 months later by Nebuchadnezzar, and then that throne was given to Zedekiah. But really, was the throne of David removed from Yekaniah or Jehoiakim? Yekaniah. I'll try to use Yekaniah because that's what he's using here. Was it really removed from him when he went off to Babel? I'm not sure, because even though he wasn't sitting on the throne and Zedekiah was, or Zidkiyahu was, even though Zidkiyahu was sitting on there, and Yekaniah went to Babel. Well, while he was in Babel, again, he wasn't sitting on the throne and managing, but he was still referenced as that, and he is the lineage. It's not Zedekiah who is the lineage of Messiah. It's Yekaniah who continues to be the lineage through which Messiah comes, and it's Yekaniah who gets returned to. He's just treated well in the end, where Zidkiyahu in the end is, well, he's just not. He's, the story. Ultimately, after about 9 years, he rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, and it's under his reign where they go into, which is also about then 9 years after Yekaniah goes into exile with Babel, inside of Babel. It's about 9 years later that Zidkiyahu or Zedekiah rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, and that doesn't go very well, because then Nebuchadnezzar surrounds him, embattles him, besieges him, spends about 2 years, and the children of Jerusalem in that moment in time, I mean, it's just horrible what they experience. They starvation, disease, the loss of children. It's just really bad. And then ultimately it falls. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar, which is 11 years after Yekaniah goes into exile, 11 years into the reign of Zidkiyahu, that the walls fall. And by the way, I'll just comment, if you read Baruch, really those walls falling and the temples and the different things that happen, it's possible that the messengers had something to do with actually what happened with the tearing down of the temple and the wall during that time. But either way, it's 11 years into Zidkiyahu that Nebuchadnezzar destroys the temple, destroys Jerusalem, and carries off some more people, and Jerusalem then becomes a travesty. I mean, it's a mess at that point in time. And that's 11 years past. And probably before this, I'm sorry, after what we're reading here, I'm sure that what we're reading here, and I'm pretty confident that this timing in Yirmiyahu, because Yirmiyahu was around at this time, this is all predates the fall of Jerusalem, but predicts the fall of Jerusalem. I believe we're going to read here in a minute. So Okay, so here concerning the sovereign who sits on the throne of David, so it's either Yekanya or Sidkiyahu, either way. And concerning all the people who dwell in this city, which I believe they're saying this city being Babel, and concerning your brothers who have not gone out with you into Babel or into exile, which is Babel, who stayed in Jerusalem. So I believe this city could either be Jerusalem or Babel. If they went to Babel, then these are the people who went into exile as they were supposed to. And these people are certainly those who did not go into exile. And then this is what Yahuwah speaks concerning them. And thus says Yahuwah of hosts, see, I am sending on them the sword, the scarcity of food, and the pestilence, and I shall make them like spoiled figs, so spoiled as to be inedible. And I shall pursue them with a sword, with a scarcity of food, and with pestilence, and I shall make them a horror among all the reigns of the earth, to be a curse and an astonishment and a hissing and a reproach among all the Gentiles where I have driven them. For they did not heed my words, declares Yahuwah, which I sent to them by my servants, the Nebiim, rising up early and sending them, yet you did not listen, declares Yahuwah. You therefore, hear the word of Yahuwah, all you exiles whom I have sent from Jerusalem to Babel. So I'm going to say, having read the rest of the history, that what took place here in verse 16 really, actually starting in verse 17, this happened to the people who remained in the land when they weren't supposed to. And even those, and if you were studying, some of them went down into Egypt and still got chased down there and experienced the same thing. So the people who stayed in the land when they were told to go with Nebuchadnezzar to Babel, they are the ones that we're referring to here, where Yahuwah says, see, I'm sending on them the sword, the scarcity of food, and the pestilence, and I shall make them like spoiled figs, so spoiled as to be inedible. These are the people who were left in Jerusalem against the will of Yahuwah. And I shall pursue them with a sword, with a scarcity of food, and with pestilence, and I shall make them a horror among the reigns of the earth, to be a curse and an astonishment and a hissing and a reproach among all the Gentiles. That's what took place in the days of Sidkiyahu and the fall of Jerusalem. This is, the couple years that they were besieged. This is what took place. For they did not heed my words, declares Yahuwah, which I sent to them by my servants, the Nebiim, the prophets, rising up early and sending them, yet you did not listen. Okay, so here we are in 20. You, therefore, hear the word of Yahuwah, all you exiles whom I have sent from Jerusalem to Babel. So these are the ones who were obedient and went to Babel. Thus says Yahuwah of hosts, the Elohim of Yisrael, concerning Ahab, son of Kuleya, and Sidkiyahu, son of Maaseiah, and that would not be Sidkiyahu the king, that would be Sidkiyahu the prophet, who are Nabah falsely, in other words, they're prophesying falsely to you in my name. See, I am giving them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, sovereign of Babel, and he shall smite them before your eyes. And because of them, all the exiles of Yehuda who are in Babel shall use a curse, saying, Yahuwah make you like Sidkiyahu and Ahab, whom the sovereign of Babel roasted in the fire. Because they have done wickedness in Israel and committed adultery with their neighbors' wives, and have spoken a word in my name falsely, which I have not commanded them. And I am he who knows and am a witness, declares Yahuwah. And speak to Shemayahu the Nehelamite, saying, Thus says Yahuwah of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, saying, because you have sent letters in your name to all the people who are in Jerusalem, to Siphaniah, son of Maaseiah, the Kohen, and to all the Kohanim, saying, Yahuwah has made you Kohen instead of Jehoiada, the Kohen. So basically, this Shemayahu, the Nehelamite, says that he has been made priest instead of Jehoiada, the Kohen, so that there are overseers in the house of Yahuwah over everyone who is mad and makes himself a Nabi, that you should put him in the stocks and in the iron collar. Okay, I'm not going to spin. That's all hard. I'm sure that was hard to listen to, and it's hard to read. But you get the idea that there are people who are in charge, who are leading, who are not faithful leaders. It would be like what we're experiencing in the church today, where our leaders are not teaching us rightly and are teaching us error. And leading us away from the instructions of Yahuwah instead of toward the instructions of Yahuwah. So here in verse 27, so why have you not reproved Yirmiyahu of Anatoth, who makes himself a Nabi to you? For he has sent to us in Babel, saying, This is long, build houses and dwell, and plant gardens and eat their fruit. So Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, sent to the folks in Babylon, the exiles in Babylon, telling them, you're going to be there a while. Build your houses and plant gardens and eat your fruit. And Zephaniah the Kohen read this letter in the hearing of Yirmiyahu the Nabi. Then the word of Yahuwah came to Yirmiyahu, saying, Send to all those in exile, saying, Thus said Yahuwah concerning Shemaiah the Nehelamite, because Shemaiah has Nabu to you, and I have not sent him. So Shemaiah is a false prophet, and he has made you to trust on falsehood. Therefore said Yahuwah, see, I am bringing punishment upon Shemaiah the Nehelamite and his seed, and he shall have no one to dwell among the people, nor is he to see the good that I am about to do for my people, declares Yahuwah, for he has spoken apostasy against me. So this is all I'm just going to say also. He's not going to see any good that Yahuwah might do in the days that he brings them back from Babel, but he's also not going to see, Shemaiah is not going to see the good that I am about to do for my people. And that is the gathering into the promised land. Shemaiah will never see that. So chapter 30. So, and I'm sorry, I know 29 was a hard read, but I just wanted to give you some background and just make it clear. 29 was not my focus of this commentary, but it needs to be done. I felt like it needed to be done because I don't want it to sound like I am that I'm saying that everything in these chapters has to do with the end time, the gathering, the promise, that there is referencing to the more temporal gathering that took place as they came out of Babel. So that was my point there. Let me take a break here and I'll be right back. So here we are in chapter 30. It reads like this. The word that came to Yirmiyahu from Yahuwah, saying, Thus spoke Yahuwah, Elohim of Yisrael, saying, Write in a book for yourself all the words that I have spoken to you. For look, the days are coming, declares Yahuwah, when I shall turn back the captivity of my people, Yisrael and Yehudah, declares Yahuwah, and I shall bring them back to the land that I gave to their fathers and let them possess it. Okay, very important. So again, this is not limited to this area in Jeremiah's prophecies. This is not the first and only time he says it. This is not limited to the prophet Yirmiyahu. This theme is everywhere. And here's what he's saying. He's speaking to Yirmiyahu and telling him to write in a book these words. For look, the days are coming, declares Yahuwah, when I shall turn back the captivity of my people, Yisrael and Yehudah. Okay, so a couple quick things. This is going to have some near and far implication because the people of Yehudah are in Babel, and that captivity will also be turned back, and they will, the people who are in Babel, which really are not as many as you would think. There are many Yehudim also still in the land. But that return does not include Yisrael, doesn't include my people Yisrael, only Yehudah. And so while this does have a application probably to the return of Babylon from Babylon, it clearly is referencing the end time, the gathering, because it will include Yisrael in addition to Yehudah. So it's not only going to be the tribes of Yehudah and Benjamin and the half tribe of Levi. It's going to be the rest of the tribes and the other half of the tribe of Yehudah, where the captivity gets turned back. And this is in time. This is latter time, which will also be made equally clear as we go through Jeremiah 30 and 31 here. Uh, and another comment, and I shall bring them back to the land that I gave to their fathers and let them possess it. So when they come back, they're coming back to the land, and this is end time prophecy. And they're not just in Babylon at this point in time. They are at the gathering. They're going to be throughout the whole world and from Sheol, quite frankly, because they're not just living, but the dead, the ones that have already passed, are part of what gets brought back into this land to possess the land that he had given to their fathers for them to possess it. Okay. And so verse 4, and these are the words Yahuwah spoke concerning Israel and Yehuda, both, not just the southern kingdom, but the northern kingdom as well, all of the tribes of Israel and Yehuda. So this is not just Yehuda who is in Babylon. Again, he's speaking to the larger context of Israel here. For this is what Yahuwah said, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. And ask now and see if man is giving birth. Why do I see every man with his hands on his loins like a woman in labor, and all faces turned pale? Oh, for great is that day, there is none like it, and it is the time of Jacob's distress, but he shall be saved out of it. Most of us know, if you know Day of the Lord, Day of Yahuwah, Day of the Lord rhetoric, this is this time of Jacob's distress or Jacob's distress. This is the day. First of all, the time of Jacob's distress is the great tribulation. Let me just back up to 7. For great is that day, there is none like it. That is the day of Yahuwah. And it is the time of Jacob's distress. So Jacob's distress, if we go back to Matthew 24, this is the great tribulation that is taking place, that is ended when that great day begins, when the sign and the sun and moon and stars appear, and Yahushua with his messengers or his angels comes crashing across the clouds from east to west with his messengers going out and gathering his people from wherever they are, from the east, the west, the south, from Sheol. They're all coming, and this is what we're referring to. For great is that day, the day of Yahuwah, there's none like it, and it is the time of Jacob's distress, but he shall be saved out of it. So the great tribulation, the great distress will be cut short, and then he will be raptured, resurrection, all of Jacob, all of Israel and Yehuda will be saved out of it. So this is end times. This is the end time day of Yahuwah. This is the end time, the gathering into the promised land, which is at the time that they're gathered will be the New Jerusalem up in the heavens, but soon to be brought back to the earth in the same area, which is the land that was given to their fathers. Okay, and it shall be in that day, I'm in verse 8 now, and it shall be in that day, declares Yahuwah of hosts, that I break his yoke from your neck and tear off your bonds, and foreigners no more enslave them. And they shall serve Yahuwah their Elohim and David their sovereign, whom I raise up for them. Okay, so when they are brought, this is again still the gathering in the end times, and at that time, when they're taken away from wherever they may be held and kept, they will be brought back to serve Yahuwah their Elohim and David their sovereign, whom I raise up for them. Well, David their sovereign is not David, although David will have, I'm sure, a prominent spot in the kingdom to come, or in the reign of Elohim. But when we're speaking of David, the sovereign at that time, it will be the throne of David. It will be the Messiah of the lineage of David, of the throne of David, that will be the sovereign, who will be the ruler. We're going to see him referenced here in just a little bit. But when we talk about they shall serve Yahweh their Elohim and David their sovereign, they're talking about God the Father and God the Son. Elohim the Father and Elohim the Son. Okay, and in verse 10, and you do not fear, O Jacob, my servant, declares Yahuwah, nor be discouraged, O Israel, for look, I am saving you from afar, and your seed from the land of their captivity. And Jacob shall return, and have rest, and be at ease, with no one to trouble him. Again, this is the end time stuff. It is not when they come back from Babylon. It can't be, because they were not at ease, and they had people to trouble them. So if that was the return he's referring to here, then this scripture is not true. It's not how it played out for them. So what? I don't really even have to go there. I think we all know that Yahuwah would not have been thwarted in those days post Babylon if that was his intent. So it just is not the case. This cannot be speaking of the Babylonian return or the get regathering from Babylon. And so just some more comments here. He's going to bring them from afar and your seed from the land of their captivity. So it isn't just, it's all time. It's all of Israel from all of antiquity, not just those who are living at the time, but those who are in Sheol and, yes. Okay. And then also just to affirm again in verse 10 that Jacob shall return and have rest and be at ease with no one to trouble him. And that is a characteristic of the gathering into the promised land, because at that time there will be no one to trouble us. We will be at rest. We will be at ease, and there will be no one to trouble us. All right, verse 11. For I am with you, declares Yahuwah, to save you. Though I make a complete end of all Gentiles where I have scattered you, yet I do not make a complete end of you. But I shall reprove you in judgment, and by no means leave you unpunished. So this is the end times. He makes a complete end of all Gentiles. It's all over. The judgment takes place. And that's what we're referencing here. But he does, he does make Israel and Yehuda both know that, you've done wrong. And so there is judgment, and that's what is taking place. And he didn't leave us unpunished. So verse 12, for thus says Yahuwah, your breach is incurable, your wound is grievous. No one pleads your cause to bind up. There are no healing medicines for you. All those loving you have forgotten you. They do not seek you. For I smote you as an enemy smites with cruel chastisement, because your wickedness is great, your sins have increased. Why do you cry about your breach? Your pain is incurable because of your many wickednesses, because your sins have increased. I have done this to you. So what's he referring to here? This is where he destroys the land because of all of their horrible disobedience. He destroys the land and he has scattered them. They were not curable. They were going to be judged, and they were judged. They're going to be remembered, but they were judged. And that's what he's referring to here. In verse 16, however, all those who devour you shall be devoured. So all those people through whom, and this is a constant theme throughout all the prophets, all the Gentile nations that are used to judge and chastise Israel will in turn be judged and chastised for their judging of Israel, especially when they go too far, which they all did. They all were cruel in their chastising of Israel. And all your adversaries, every one of them, verse 16 again, every one of them shall go into captivity, and those who exploit you shall be exploited, and all who prey upon you I shall make a prey. For I restore health to you and heal you of your wounds, declares Yahuwah. For they have called you an outcast, saying, this is Zion, no one is seeking her. Verse 18, thus said Yahuwah, see, I turn back the captivity of Jacob's tents and have compassion on his dwelling places. And the city shall be built upon its own mound, and the palace stand on its right place. So here we are returning and turning back the captivity again into Zion, and he's going to turn back that captivity, and he's going to have compassion on his dwelling places, and the city shall be built upon its own mound, and the palace shall stand on its right place. So I'm pretty confident, while this is less certain, I'm pretty confident that this city shall be built. This is the New Jerusalem built upon its own mountain, which is Mount Zion, and the palace shall stand in its right place, which is the land promised to the Father, the current lands over there now. It could be in a small part related to the return from Babylon, because the city was rebuilt upon its own mound, which would be Mount Zion in that time, and there was a palace that stood on its right place in that. So it's possible that this could have been a near prophetic utterance as well, related to what happened once they returned from Babel, or it could be in time, or it could be both. All right, so verse 19, and out of them shall arise thanksgiving and the voice of those who are laughing, and I shall increase them, and they shall not diminish, and I shall esteem them, and they shall not be small. Maybe you could say that when they came back from Babylon, this would be representative in part and in a way, but mostly they never arose to that, not in the times of the return of Babylon from that 400 and 500 years, basically from 500 BC to the time of Messiah. It really was just more chaotic than any kind of a realized promise. So verse 20, and his children shall be as before, and his congregation shall be established before me, and I shall punish all those who oppress them. And here we are. This is Messiah. And his prince shall be from him, and his ruler shall come from among him. And I shall bring him near, and he shall approach me. For who is this who pledged his heart to approach me, declares Yahuwah? And you shall be my people, and I shall be your Elohim. Again, this is a constant theme. Maybe this is referring to a bit of how it was when they returned from Babel. Maybe, because they had some quick seasons when Ezra came back, and maybe Nehemiah, maybe when Zerubbabel came, maybe some, but mostly that's not how they acted. But this, and you shall be my people, and I shall be your Elohim, is a constant theme throughout all the prophets of that end time when the gathering takes place into the promised land, and the covenant, the new covenant, the renewed covenant is realized. This is a constant theme for that time, that we're going to be his people and he's going to be our Elohim. Okay, verse 23. See, the storm of Yahuwah shall go forth in a rage, a whirling storm. It bursts upon the head of the wicked. The burning displeasure of Yahuwah shall not turn back until he has done and established the purposes of his heart. In the latter days you shall understand it. So what is this? This is the day of Yahuwah, reestablishing again that at least part of this prophetic utterance, and maybe all of it, was intended for the end times, the gathering, the promised land, and the day of Yahuwah that precedes it, because that's what he's describing here in verse 23. See, the storm of Yahuwah goes forth in a rage. This is the day of Yahuwah, or in modern translations, it'd be the day of the Lord. A whirling storm, it bursts upon the head of the wicked. Okay, so you get it. This is day of the Lord at the end of chapter 31. And now we enter chapter 31. So now we arrive at chapter 31, which was, the primary focus. This is the most prominent chapter, probably the most prominent chapter in Yirmiyahu amongst many, many prominent chapters. But this one has so many references in the new writings because it has so much has so much meaning in what has taken place and will take place. We needed to go to chapter 29 to a lesser degree to set the stage. I think we definitely needed to go to chapter 30. And the reason that I felt like we needed to start at especially 30 was to set the stage and make it clear that when we're talking about 31, while we might have some references to the period of time that they were in that moment related to the return or the gathering of them back from Babylon, that is not the primary context of these chapters in Yirmiyahu. The primary context of these chapters are end time. They are the promise, the gathering, the day of the Lord. This is all end time, which you just heard in chapter 30, where it says this will become known to you in the latter days, which he's going to, I believe he says it again in 31 here. Maybe. We'll see. But let's just go ahead and get started in chapter 31. At that time, declares Yahuwah, I shall be the Elohim of all clans of Israel, and they shall be my people. So just heads up again that just right in the beginning of this chapter, at that time, I shall be Elohim of all the clans of Israel. Well, at what time then are we talking? It cannot be, I suppose that he remains the Elohim of all the clans of Israel, but this references to the consolidated Israel, which you're going to see here in a minute. I'm pretty confident it's here. It might be Ezekiel, but if not here, you would see it in Ezekiel, where we're talking about the two sticks being brought back together, where Yisrael and Yehuda are rejoined again in the end times. But that has never happened. That has not happened. Yisrael remains scattered amongst the world. It's only Well, and I guess so does Yehuda, but Israel remained scattered even during the days of Messiah. So um, this is in times, and that's identified by I shall be the Elohim of all the clans of Israel, and they shall be my people. Well, maybe that doesn't 100% identify, but as we keep going, you'll see that all of these together are very just evidence that this is all in time, end of the age prophetic utterances. So verse 2, thus said Yahweh, a people escaped from the sword found favor in the wilderness. Yisrael, when it went to find rest. Yahweh appeared to me from afar. I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore I shall draw you with kindness. I am going to build you again, and you shall be rebuilt, O maiden of Yisrael. Again you shall take up your tambourines and go forth in the dances of those who rejoice. Now, I suppose, again, when they went back to the land after leaving Babel, there was a somewhat building, but it was in constant build failure. And it was all the way through to the end when they were destroyed by Rome. And so it never really, what he's promising here, where he's building again, if that's the building he's talking about, I don't know, man. What would you even say about that? But that's not what he's referencing here. I'm going to build you again. And when he builds us this time, in the end, when he builds us with the new Jerusalem, yeah, it's going to be forever. And it's going to be all the promises that we see everywhere else. All right, verse 5. Again, you shall plant vines on the mountains of Shomer. The planters shall plant and treat them as common. Now, I'm going to say that I'll make a comment here that when the new Jerusalem comes down, it will be sitting atop what would be considered any current mountains and hills of Shomer, because in the end times, all those mountains are going to be laid low and the valleys are going to be raised up. Waters are going to flee, the seas are going to flee, etc. And that's going to form the foundation for the Mount Zion that comes down. So when he's referring to in verse 5 here, and this is not the only place, this will be in Ezekiel. We'll find this in other places also, where when we are talking about Mount Zion or the Kodesh mountain, you'll see that we are referring to Mount Zion, the New Jerusalem. And this is a common description where we've got planted vines being planted on the mountains of Shomerim. The planters shall plant and treat them as common, where basically, if you, like I, were envisioning the New Jerusalem and it comes down to be one big city, like a New York City, that's not how it appears it's going to be. There probably will be components. I mean, it's very high, I'm sure there will be city-like components, but there are countryside-like components too. There are vineyards, there are farms, there's the livestock, there are cattle on the hills. So when we get to the promise, the Kodesh mountain, and when we get to New Jerusalem, it's not just a big city, it's wonderful hills, and it's just going to be wonderful. I mean, I can just imagine our mansions being set in that kind of environment for those of us who want to live there. So, okay. So verse 6, and there shall be a day when the watchmen cry on Mount Ephraim, arise and let us go up to Zion, to Yahuwah our Elohim. Rise and let us go up to Zion. This would be Mount Zion. This is the New Jerusalem. For thus says Yahuwah, sing with gladness for Jacob, and shout among the chief of the nations. Cry out, give praise, and say, O Yahuwah, save your people, the remnant of Yisrael. I think you'll see throughout the prophets again that the saved ones of Israel, because clearly not all of Israel gets saved. I mean, there's more sin, and if you were reading Second Ezra and Baruch, and you don't even have to read those, you could see it in Scripture. It's just the remnant of Israel that's going to be saved. Most will turn away. Most will be judged. Most will be counted amongst. They'll just be part of the second resurrection. Okay, so verse 8, see, I am bringing them from the land of the north and shall gather them from the ends of the earth. So I'm just going to say, going back up to verse 7 real quickly, when we are talking about these events, this is also the time when he's bringing them in verse 8 from the land of the north and shall gather them from the ends of the earth, among them the blind, the lame, and those with child and those in labor together, a great assembly returning here. So this is a regathering from everywhere, possibly again, some reference to the return from Babylon, the gathering from Babylon, but I think it's more likely to be the gathering from the end time gathering. Now, I'm not sure what to do with this. I mean, I can imagine, but I have to imagine, because when it says, see, I'm bringing them from the land of the north and shall gather them from the ends of the earth, among them the blind and the lame and those with child and those in labor, together a great assembly. Well, clearly, when we are gathered and when we are resurrected, we're not going to be blind. We're not going to be lame. We're not going to be a child and those in labor together. We're not going to be any of those. We might have been at the moment that the resurrection occurs, that the rapture, the changing, that gathering occurs, might have been. And so maybe this is what they're referring to, because I just can't imagine. This almost conjures up this idea that they're going to be laboring like you would picture going on in the world today, where they're going to be traversing and just making a pilgrimage off to Israel. Off to the promised land. And I just don't believe that. There are too many other descriptions that you would have to judge this one by. So, verse 9, with weeping they shall come, and with prayers I shall bring them. I shall make them walk by rivers of waters in a straight way in which they do not stumble, for I shall be a father to Israel and Ephraim. He is my firstborn, which is Kodesh. So I know from other passages that there is going to be weeping. When this all happens to us, we're just going to be reminded, and we're going to be weeping for when we are in those end times, when we were gathered and everything's called back to our minds. We're going to have that momentary, that period of time where we're going to be going, my goodness, we were so far short. We were so undeserving of Yahuwah. We're going to beat ourselves. We're going to do, I don't know if it's in this passage. I can't remember because it's all running together a bit, but I know it's in Ezekiel, where just, we're going to be beating ourselves. We're going to be beating our legs. We're going to be doing things that are just saying, I can't believe we did that. And again, this would be, they shall come with prayers and bring them by walking by rivers of water. I don't think, you know what? Okay, with weeping they shall come, and with prayers I shall bring them. So I think this might be the gathering. Once we're there, and he shall make us walk by rivers of water in a straight way in which we do not stumble. And I shall be a father to Israel and Ephraim, and he is my firstborn. So I really think that while this first part of verse 9 might be the gathering, once we're there, this would be a bit of how it will be for us. I mean, just a quick representation where he's going to make us walk by rivers of water in a straight way. So basically, he's basically saying it's going to be pretty cool for us there. In verse 10, hear the word of Yahuwah, O Gentiles, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, he who scattered Israel gathers him, and shall guard him as a shepherd his flock. So this would be the end time gathering, the gathering. When he gathers those that he scattered, when he does that, he's going to guard them as a shepherd, his flock. Well, that didn't take place when they came back from Babylon. If it did take place, it was in it was for limited times, in limited ways, because they faced an awful lot once they came back. I mean, read the period of the times when Antiochus Epiphanes is there. It's just that's not being guarded. So I just don't think he can be talking about, this must be the end time. And once he's guarding us there, we will be guarded. There will be no one to make us fear again. In verse 11, for Yahuwah shall ransom Jacob and redeem him from the hand of one stronger than him. So he's going to ransom Jacob, a constant theme, and redeem him from the hand of one stronger than he. Well, who would that be? I'm not sure exactly, but I can imagine and place a lot of, I could put Satan in there. I could put certain lands. It doesn't really matter. Wherever we're at, we're going to be ransomed, and we're going to be redeemed, and we're going to be brought back to Yahuwah in the land. In verse 12, and they shall come in and shall sing on the height of Zion. This is Mount Zion. This is Kodesh Mountain. So we're going to be singing on the height of Zion, and flow toward the goodness of Yahuwah, where he will be living, for grain and for new wine and for oil and for the young of the flock and of the herd, and their being shall be like a well-watered garden and never languish again. Our being, our soul. So we're going to be singing on the heights of Zion, and it's going to flow to the goodness and flow toward the goodness of Yahweh. I don't know what that means except for probably we're going to be singing and we're going to be flowing. We're going to just be in such relationship with Yahweh. And there's going to be grain and new wine and new oil, meaning abundance and wonderful things. There's going to be comfort. We're just going to enjoy it. We're going to have one. And for the young of the flock into the herd. So there's going to be flocks and herds. And their being, that's us, our souls, shall be like a well-watered garden and never languish again. This must be end time promise. The promise, the promised land, the gathering, because clearly they languished. If this is referring to the return, the gathering from Babylon, they languished. They languished in those 500 years before Messiah. Then they languished in those 70 years after Messiah, and they've languished since. So that it can't be that. This has to be the end time, the gathering, which is pretty evidenced. Okay, verse 13. Then shall a maiden rejoice in a dance, and young men and old together, and I shall turn their mourning to joy, and shall comfort them, and shall make them rejoice from their sorrow. This is just promise. This is how it's going to be in the promised land, in our promised beings, in our promised bodies, in our resurrection bodies, and in the new covenant. Just this is how it's all going to be. And shall fill the being of the Kohen with fatness, and my people shall be satisfied in my goodness, with my goodness, declares Yahweh. This is the promise. These are the promises that this is what they understood they were waiting for. This is what I now understand that I'm waiting for and can't wait. Thus says in verse 15, thus says Yahweh, a voice. Okay, this is important, because this is the passage referred to in Matthew when Herod sends out to kill all the children 2 years young and older because he's trying to kill off Messiah. And then we hear Matthew saying, and this is the fulfillment of Rama weeping because her children were no more. Well, I'm going to say that's true. Of course it's true. I mean, I'm not arguing. Who am I to argue with Matthew? But let me also say, when we read this, that is not the only period of time that Rahel, you're going to see here, that is not the only time that Rachel wept for her children. Rachel wept for her children. Rachel is the mother of all those children that were killed when Pharaoh went through killing all the young children of Moses' day, when he's trying to kill off Moses, the promise of Moses. Rachel would have been weeping for her children there. We just described that in Jerusalem, they faced horrible, horrible things there, and their children were involved. They lost their children. They ate their children, for crying out loud. It's just so the time of, and then you had there are many times. Just going back to Israel, when the Assyrians came down, they destroyed people and children. When Rome came over and they destroyed children. Now, specifically, if we want to say, but that was just children that we were dealing with when Matthew is talking about, when Matthew is referring to it in relationship to the killing of the children around the time of Messiah. Well, okay, if we're going to speak that way, then we could say the same thing about the children, the young males that were killed when Pharaoh killed them for Moses. So my point is that while what we're getting ready to read has application to the time of Messiah, it has application throughout the entire history of Israel, from even before the days of the nation of Israel, when it was just Israel, the children of Rachel in Egypt, and what happened to them there. Okay, so let me go back to verse 15 here, and it says, Thus says Yahweh, a voice was heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Well, she's refusing to be comforted because they've been killed off. Okay, so verse 16. Thus says Yahweh to her. This is what Yahweh is saying to Rachel, which is which is what we just read in 15 might be what they referenced in Matthew with regard to Messiah. But here's the point of what Yirmiyahu is saying with respect to what we just read in verse 15, where he's saying Rachel is weeping and refusing to be comforted because her children, they're no more because they've been killed. And this is the response, and this is the point, and this is the essence of this from Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah. And this is Yahuwah's response to Rachel. Thus says Yahuwah, hold back your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work, declares Yahuwah, and they shall return from the land of the enemy. So what's he saying to Rachel? Be comforted. Yeah, hold back your weeping and hold back your tears, because, hey, everything's going to be all right. And they're going to come back. While they suffered, there is a reward, and they shall return from the land of the enemy. Where they have been abused and mistreated and killed, they will be rewarded, and they will return from that. That's Yirmiyahu. That's the promise here. Let's keep going. And this is Yahuwah still speaking to Rachel. And there is expectancy for your latter end, declares Yahuwah, and your children shall return to their own country. So Yahuwah is saying to Rachel, to Rahel, there's expectancy for your latter end. There's something for you to hope for. There's a reason for you to have hope, Rachel. Yes, your children have died. They've been killed. It's hard, and I understand, but don't stop it, because you're going to be rewarded. They will be returned from the land of their enemy, and there's expectancy for you in their latter end, declares Yahuwah, and your children shall return to their own country. Well, they're dead. How are they going to return? They're going to return because they're going to be raised up from Sheol. And when are they going to be raised up from Sheol? They're going to be raised up from Sheol when the gathering occurs at the end of time. And these little children that died, and Rachel will no longer be weeping and lamenting over them. She's going to be rejoicing with her children, because they're all going to return. Rachel's coming. She's going to come, and she's going to rise up with her children. We're all going to be hanging out together, and we're going to return to their own country. And what's their own country? The promised land, the promised land, the New Jerusalem. And this is the hope. Okay, so this is the point. While in Matthew, and I'll just restate it here, while in Matthew, they're focusing on the fact that Rachel's weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. This is the point of Yirmiyahu. Yes, but there is a hope. There is a resurrection. There is a promise gathering. There's a promise to gathering into the promised land, where all things will be wonderful, and your expectancy, your hope is for that latter end. And I will say that this is, once you begin to read this in the old writings, this is the hope you see for the remnant that I referred to earlier. For the majority of Israel, they didn't know, they didn't care, just like the majority of the world today doesn't know, doesn't care. But if you want Yahuwah, and you're seeking him, and you're reading and you're learning, you're seeing these promises, and you embrace these promises. And I assure you, the remnant that were reading and knew and were Yahuwah's in those days, they saw all this, and this is their promise. When we start reading Paul in the new writings, when he talks about the expectancy, when he talks about the promise, this is the stuff he's looking forward to. This is what, when we get there and we start doing commentaries on Paul, that you must distinguish that he's talking about. Because that will make Paul make way more sense than the current teachings of the church will ever do. This idea that Paul's arguing against Torah. No, we do not have a Torah-less Messiah. We don't have a Torah-less Paul. We have Torah. We have a Torah. We don't have a Torah-less gospel. We have a Torah gospel, and Paul knows that. And all of these hopes, when you start seeing that, you will see this is what Messiah is referencing all the time, is exactly what we just read here, that Yahuwah is telling Rachel to look forward to, because everything's going to be made whole and good and wonderful. All right. So let's go back. Verse 18, I have clearly heard Ephraim lamenting. You have chastised me, and I was chastised, like an untrained calf. Turn me back, and I shall turn back. For you are Yahweh my Elohim. For after turning back, I repented, and after I was instructed, I struck myself on the thigh. I was ashamed, even humiliated, for I bore the reproach of my youth. This is what I was referring to just a little bit ago. I know this is also in Ezekiel. When we are called, we're going to recognize, we're going to be lamenting. This is us. We're going to be lamenting. We are going to say, I know you chastised me and I deserved it because I was an untrained calf. But Yahweh, turn me back, and I want to come back, for you're my Elohim. You're my, oh, this is awesome. For after my turning back, I repented. Once I see it, once I repent. After I was instructed, I struck myself on the thigh. I can't believe I did that. I was so ashamed, even humiliated, for I bore the reproach of my youth. Can't tell you how many times my wife and I share that we bear the reproach of our youth. We're so ashamed of so many things that we failed in. Well, this is what we're all going to experience at that time. But I don't believe it's going to be very long lived, because pretty quickly we're all going to be enabled. We're all going to be walking in perfect harmony, perfect Torah, perfect. We're going to be walking in the new covenant, which we're going to read about here in just a few moments. All right, so verse 20. Is Ephraim a precious son to me, a child of delights? For though I spoke against him, I still remembered him. That is why my affections were deeply moved for him. I have great compassion for him, declares Yahuwah. So Ephraim, and just so you know, if you're not familiar with this, Ephraim, this is Joseph's younger son, actually, but Ephraim became known and recognized as his firstborn. So what would Ephraim be? Ephraim became, like we say, Judah or Yehuda for the southern kingdoms. Ephraim became a word using one of the 12 tribes. Ephraim became synonymous with the northern tribes, because Ephraim was the chief tribe of the time. I mean, they were, they were chief. They were more leaders, they were just a head tribe at the time. But because of that, I should have brushed up on this a little bit, but you've got the you got the blessings, and then you have the firstborn blessings. Well, Ephraim was treated, when you go to the passage where Jacob is putting his hands on those two children, and they reverse them. Well, he turns Ephraim into effectively the firstborn, the set apart. So, okay. So basically, I won't keep lamenting, or I'm not lamenting, but going over that. We'll just restate this. So Ephraim, his firstborn, which represents all of Israel, it's precious to him. So Israel set apart, Ephraim set apart to me, a child of delights. This is how Yahuwah speaks to him. Even though he spoke against him and had to chastise him, I remembered him. I came back for him, which is the promise. Though we were chastised for a season, he's going to remember us, and he's going to bring us back, and we're going to reach out to him with all our heart, soul, mind, and being. And so this is what's ahead of us. And that's why my affections were deeply moved for him. I have great compassion for him, says Yahuwah, declares Yahuwah. Put up the signpost, mark landmarks, lay your heart toward the highway, the way in which you went. Turn back, O maiden of Israel, turn back to these cities of yours. Yep, turn your heart back. Verse 22, till when would you turn here and there, O backsliding daughter? For Yahuwah has created what is new on earth. A woman encompasses a man. I don't really know what to do with that. I get the idea of he's created what is new on earth. There are new things that are going to be new on earth at the time, but I'm not sure what he means by this woman encompassing a man. I guess that's yet to be revealed to me. Verse 23, thus said Yahuwah of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, let them once again say this word in the land of Yehuda and its cities when I turn back their captivity, says Yahuwah. When I turn back their captivity, Yahuwah barak you, O home of righteousness, mountain of Kodeshah. So important. So thus, I'm going to read it again. So thus, and I'm going to try to do a little better job. So thus said Yahuwah of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, let them once again say this word in the land of Yehuda and its cities. This is the promised land. This is the new Jerusalem. This is the Kodesh mountain. This is Mount Zion. When I turn back their captivity, Yahuwah Barak you, O home of righteousness. So basically, these are the these are the these are us saying once again, and Israel saying once again, Barak, Yahuwah Barak you, O home of righteousness, mountain of Kodeshah, the Kodesh, the set apart mountain. This is the new Jerusalem, the home of righteousness. And they're asking Yahuwah to Barak you. They're basically just saying, yay, so cool. And this all happens when he's turned back their captivity. So this is all at the gathering when the promised land is at the time of the new covenant. So this is all end time stuff still. Verse 24, and in Yehuda and all its cities, farmers and those who journey with flocks shall dwell together. Here we are, countryside. It's not just city there. For I shall fill the weary being, and I shall replenish every grieved being. Promises, just like when Isaiah does for us. We just get shadowing visions of what it's going to be like. It's going to be so abundance, and I don't really know how to keep describing it better than they do, and so I won't keep trying. So verse 26, at this I awoke and looked around, and my sleep was sweet to me. So he really liked all of that dream he just had. He woke in all those visions, and he's just saying that was sweet. Okay, verse 27. See, the days are coming, declares Yahuwah, that I shall sow the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda with the seed of man and the seed of beast. Well, I'm not 100% sure that this is what they're referring to here, but if you think about it, at the time of the gathering, when all of Israel and all of Yehuda, which is really all of us who identify with, as Gentile believers, we've actually joined Yehuda and Israel. So this would be, I believe this is probably all of those who are resurrected. All of the believers will be considered Israel and Yehuda. Well, this is happening at the day, the gathering, and then we're going to have the promised land come down. And during those days, we're going to have us who have been resurrected and are living in spiritual bodies that have the Torah of Yahuwah written on our heart, the new spirit, all of the descriptions that you get from what we're going to read here in a few moments, and from Deuteronomy and from Ezekiel and Jubilees, all these descriptions of the kind of body and how we're going to be walking in harmony with Yahuwah, and we'll be his people, and he will be our Elohim. Well, that's all going to be happening in the New Jerusalem, but there will be the seed of man and the seed of beast still on the earth. Flesh will still be living on the earth. Not all flesh is going to be destroyed, and what is left is going to repopulate and replenish the earth. And so during that period of time, we're going to have the spiritual, those of us who have been resurrected and have our a resurrection body, will be living alongside of people who will still be being, born and raised and living in the flesh, dealing with flesh, battling flesh, fighting flesh. So I think that might be what this is referring to, that the seed that he will sow the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda with the seed of man and the seed of beast, which is flesh, for a season, because there's a time at the end of that 1,000-year reign where all flesh is done, and all that's left, death will be put down, and all that's left is the everlasting life, people, spiritual life. Okay, verse 28. And it shall be that as I have watched over them to pluck up and to break down and to throw down and to destroy and to afflict, so I shall watch over them to build and to plant. So while he's had to judge, he's going to also rebuild. In those days they shall no longer say, the fathers ate sour grapes and the children's teeth are blunted. But each one shall die for his own wickedness. Whoever eats sour grapes, his teeth shall be blunted. See, the days are coming, declares Yahuwah, when I shall make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehuda, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them from from the hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim. Let me rephrase that. I'm going to just start again in verse 31. See, the days are coming, declares Yahuwah, when I shall make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehudah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim, my covenant, which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yahuwah. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahuwah. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall they teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know Yahuwah, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yahuwah. For I shall forgive their wickedness and remember their sin no more. Okay, so verse 31 is the scripture that is quoted and referenced, certainly in, I believe it's the 8th chapter of Hebrews, but also other places in the new writings. And it's used so much of the time to speak of the idea that at the time of Messiah's first coming, we've now entered into this new covenant. But if you read even in Hebrew, which I may go visit before I leave this, if not, I'll probably just do it in a Hebrew commentary that I'll probably follow up pretty quickly after this. But when you read it in that context, it's clear that is a future hope and expectation as well. When he's referencing that which is passing away for that which will become new. That's in Hebrew, and we'll do that another time. But clearly in this context, this is the days that are coming. He is still talking about the end time days. And I will also say that this scripture does not stand alone. This timing, this whole theme, I've shown it to you. If you watched any other videos that I've done, I've shown it to you in a number of places. We've got Ezekiel 11, we've got Ezekiel, I think it's 36 and 37. We've got Deuteronomy. We've got Jubilees. We have other places where they are referencing this gathering together and into the land and something being different about the people who have been gathered together. In some places, it's the foreskin of their heart has been circumcised. They've been given a new spirit. They've been given just similar type things. Here we're going to have the Torah the Torah being written on our inward parts. All of them have this common theme of something being different about us. And that is, and also the common theme is also once it's different, once the gathering has occurred and once we're different, we have the spirit, we have the circumcised heart, we have the Torah written in our heart. We're different, and in that new relationship and ability, and in those times, in that new covenant, because that's when it begins, that is when you will see over and over again that Yahuwah says, I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. So the point here is that this new covenant, first, let me also say in verse 31, this is for Yisrael and the house of Yehudah. It's for them. So the new covenant is for them. It's not for a Gentile church. It's for them. Another evidence that we are joining Yisrael or Yehudah or both, because they're both Yisrael. But we're joining them. When we become Yahuwahs, when we become believers, we are joining with the house of Yisrael and the house of Yehudah. And we become part of theirs. And we become part of these promises, according to Paul in Ephesians. We become partakers in these promises that we're reading right here in Jeremiah. And for the people, for the remnant that become the house of Israel and the house of Yehudah, for that remnant, they were reading this. They were hearing these promises, and this is their hope in the midst of everything that had gone wrong for them as a country. This was their hope. This is what they had to look forward to, and they knew it. And in the midst of this is Messiah. In other passages, and we saw it referenced here a little bit in chapter 30, but in the midst of this, when we do get that coming New Jerusalem, the King of New Jerusalem, and first of all, the government is the reign of Elohim in that New Jerusalem. I'm going to say that it has to be because of all the references I'm seeing in the New Covenant writings that the reign of Elohim came in that first coming of Messiah, but it's primarily resides up in the heavenlies right now, with Messiah as king of as the sovereign of that reign of Elohim up in the heavenlies. But even from up in the heavenlies, it is superior and reigns supreme over the kingdoms of this world run by Satan and his peeps. So we, as members of that reign of Elohim, whenever we know we can and do and will exert our authority, we can overcome the things of this world through the authority and power of the reign of Elohim. But that exists, probably, I'm sure it exists now, but I know for a fact when the New Jerusalem comes down, that is the reign of the entire earth. There are no competing reigns. There's only the reign of Elohim, with Yahushua as the sovereign of that. And that is their promise. That's the Messiah that they were waiting for, was that king, that promised king of all the world that's going to be sovereign over the reign of Elohim, and was their promise. Okay, I'm beating this to death, but this is such a critical passage with respect to how people of the church are receiving and interpreting and hearing what they've been taught through Hebrews and some of the other things, which I hope to visit and share against some of the scriptures we're talking about now. So, all right, let me go back to 35 here, and we're almost done. Thus says Yahuwah, who gives the sun for a light by day, and the laws of the moon and the stars for a light by night, who stirs up the sea, and its waves roar. Yahuwah of hosts is his name. If these laws vanish from before me, declares Yahuwah, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation before me forever. So we'll just... well, never mind. That was the laws of the sun and moon, I believe, up here. Yeah, the sun and the moon. Okay. Then, thus says Yahuwah, if the Shemayim above could be measured, and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I would also cast off all the seed of Israel for all that they have done, declares Yahuwah. See, the days are coming, declares Yahuwah, that the city shall be built for Yahuwah from the tower of Hananel to the corner gate, and the measuring line shall again extend straight ahead to the hill Garib. Then it shall turn toward Goah, and all the valley of the dead, and all the valley of the dead bodies and of the ashes, and of the fields as far as the Wadi Kidron, to the corner of the horse gate toward the east is to be Kodesh to Yahuwah. It shall not be plucked up or thrown down any more. So if all of this gathering and all of these times for something else, or for something else in another time, then how do we have something being plucked up and thrown down when it's promised to us that when the time comes, it will be plucked up and thrown down no more forever? So that is the end. That's the end. That's the gathering into the promised land with the Messiah, the King, in our resurrected bodies in the new covenant. And that's the promise. So in closing, let me just address a few more things. First, let me return up here to verses 35, 36, and 37 in context of who we are as the church, as the assembly, as the believers, because it's clear. I don't want to speak for everybody, but my understanding throughout my church life before I started coming into some of these new understandings was that the day of Israel had passed because they had rejected their Messiah. They had fallen into sin, and they pretty much were just judged, and just their ways were rejected. They ended up being replaced. Their ways end up getting replaced with the new ways of the new covenant for the new church. Well, in all of the study I've been doing now, I am understanding that we as the assembly, we as the church, we as the ecclesia, however you want to refer to yourself, those of us who have joined ourselves, if we are actual blood lineage of Yisrael, good. I mean, I hope that I am, but I can't know that I am. So I'm potentially a Gentile, and that's okay too, because I'm joining myself to them. But my point would be that, and I will also say that the church pretty much understands that there is end time prophecy related to Israel. So, and even the land of Israel. So they know that there's got to be some sort of coming back together of Israel at the end times. But they still think of themselves as a separate entity from the Israel of, in general, a separate entity from the entity of Israel. When in truth, we've always been the entity of Israel, has never gone away, even though it's not in the forefront. It's never been lost to Yahuwah. We are, as the professing church, the assembly, we are members of Israel and or Yehuda. Either way, we are members of the body that is in the end reconstituted. And I'll just say again in verse 35. So he's basically saying, if the sun and moon pass away, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation from me forever. So in this period of time, from the time of Messiah forward, I mean, you could start back earlier if you want to, but clearly many things where they lost the land of Israel in the days when Rome, the Romans kicked them off the land, then they became more or less lost. But here in verse 36, basically saying the seed of Israel shall, if the sun and moon pass away, then the seed of Israel shall cease to be a nation before me forever. So even though we haven't been able to see them visibly, they've never not been a nation before Yahweh. So they've always been a nation. And when now you go back to Paul would be a bad example, but all the people he was, bringing into the belief and into the faith back that were not professing Israelites or Yehudim, they were joining, and it was pretty clear in his teachings that that's what they were doing. They were joining Israel and becoming partakers of the promises of Israel. Clearly, not necessarily the promises of Israel from the standpoint of what's going to happen when the Romans chastise them, although many of them were partakers of that as well, but partakers of what the future is, this future promise, this future gathering, the promised land, etc. And then just to finish up in verse 37, if the Shemayim above could be measured and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I would also cast off all the seed of Israel for all that they have done. So they've been judged, but the remnant, those that he intends to bring to himself, those written in the Lamb's book of life, they will always be, no matter what they've done as a nation, Israel remains the promised people, the covenant people. And no matter what they've done, he has not cast them off. In fact, he has redeemed them and restored them through the work of Messiah. Okay, now let's turn to Hebrews chapter 8. Now, the first part of this has to do with the priesthood, and it's an interesting topic, but it's not what we're discussing today. Let me go to verse 6, which is the subject of what we're talking about today, and forms one of the foundations that the church uses to suggest that from the beginning of the church age, we've been in the new covenant. From the beginning of Messiah's resurrection and the beginning of the church, we've been in this new or renewed covenant. New, if you hear me say new and renewed, they're really the same. Renewed as in, new as in the form. When we say new, we don't mean new as in brand new, never before seen, but a new as in a refreshed, a renewed, a remade covenant. And so that tends to be, and that's why I think in the Yah scriptures here, in the Hallelujah scriptures, and I believe even in these scriptures, they use the word renewed covenant a lot, where you'll see new covenant a lot. They're really the same thing. They are pretty much what we're going to see described here. They both represent the same type of covenant here. So let's just start in verse 6. But now he, being Messiah, has obtained a more excellent service, inasmuch as he is also mediator of a better covenant, which was constituted on better promises. Amen, because that's exactly what he is. Now, because of this, as he is also mediator of a better covenant, which was constituted on better promises, the church will read this and interpret this to mean that this is the evidence that we are living in that new covenant now. But let me just, and we'll come back, and because we'll make the point here, the fact that he is mediator of a better covenant does not necessarily mean that we are living in that new covenant at this point in time. That's not, I mean, it could mean that. That's a possibility. And if we had other evidences, we would accept it that way. But what he is clearly when he died and he gave his blood, just like in, I think it's Luke 20, when he says, here's the blood, here's my blood, here's the wine, this is the blood, this is my blood of the new covenant. So when we read that in the church teachings, when we read that, we think, okay, so he's initiating the new covenant at this time, at that moment. But that's not what he's saying. He is saying that his blood is for the new covenant. It is what bought this new covenant. But he is not saying that we were going to begin living in that new covenant at that point in time, or that renewed covenant. Just like the book of Hebrews here is not say, it is saying he is also mediator of a better covenant, because he is mediator of a better covenant. But it is not necessarily saying that we are living in that new covenant now, which I'll make the point in a few moments here. For verse 7, for if that first had been faultless, then no place would have been sought for a second. Clearly. Now, again, the church thinks that means that what was experienced under Israel, what they experienced, what was found that had fault. But now that what we're experiencing since Messiah came is the faultless, the new covenant. So the faultful, the Torah-based experience of the Israelites has been now replaced with what they think is the second, and they think they're living in that second. But that's, again, not what this is saying. The first isn't perfect. It will be done away with. What Israel was asked to follow, which is the instructions of really Torah at its very foundational basis, is just simply the commands of Yahweh. If he changes his mind, he says, do something different now versus something then, okay, that's Torah, that's his command. But whatever it is, the whole premise of what Israel was going through, I mean, if you read their writings, that is the foundational. They were called to follow the Torah as it was written, but also as it was given to them. There was just Torah, and that was the essence of it. Follow Torah, follow Yahuwah, follow his commands, and that was the essence of it. And had they been able to follow that, it would have been better than it turned out to be. Clearly, they didn't bother to try to follow. Nobody did, except for the remnant. They weren't, people didn't try to follow it. But just to reiterate, for if the first had been faultless, which it was not, then no place would have been sought for a second, which was. So the first one was had fault, and so the second one that will replace it is exactly that. Because the first one had fault, the second one that will not have fault is going to replace the first one. For finding fault with him, in verse 8, he says, see, the days are coming when I shall conclude with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehuda a renewed covenant. Okay, so from verse 8 through, and we'll go down here, basically he does the entire passage of Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah 31:31. He does the whole thing. So that's all this is going to be. He's going to be reading, the days are coming. Now, when we see that, it is possible, because in the days of Yirmiyahu, that's 500 years before this time, roughly. So it would be reasonable to say that the days are coming, and that the days that they're referencing would be the days of Messiah. It's possible. It's one of the things that they read and use to build that we're living in the new covenant now. But that's not, again, what it's saying. It could be, but we're going to have more in a minute to help us put this in its correct context, because as I just shared throughout Yirmiyahu, the context of Yirmiyahu 31:31, and therefore this Hebrews verse 8 through, I think it's 13. You'll see in a minute. We'll go see. Well, here, I'll just tell you now. Verses through 12, 8 through 12. This is simply Yirmiyahu. And the context of Yirmiyahu and his prophecy was in time. It was the gathering into the promised land. There's evidence all over the place. And then you can take it further than Yirmiyahu, because Yirmiyahu does not stand alone. It stands with the witness of Ezekiel. It stands with the witness of Isaiah. It stands with the witness of Deuteronomy. It stands with the witness of Jubilees, that this event takes place in the end times at the time of the gathering, when we receive the resurrection and the promised land. So while you could, and if that's all you understand, if that's the only teaching you've received is just what we're receiving here, yeah, you would read this and go, okay, so the days are coming. It must be talking about these days of Messiah that he was living in that time. So I'll read it quickly, because this is Yirmiyahu 31:31. So for finding fault with him, he says, see, the days are coming, says Yahuwah, when I shall conclude with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehuda a renewed covenant. So there's the covenant with the house of Yehuda and Israel. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Mitzrayim, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I disregarded them. Yep, that's what we've read. And understood it to be, because this is the covenant that I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yahuwah, giving my laws in their mind, and I shall write them on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And they shall by no means teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, know Yahuwah, because they all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, because I shall forgive their unrighteousness and their sins, and their lawlessness I shall no longer remember. So again, this is the covenant being made with Israel. So this is who as the Hebrews are talking, they're talking about the promise to Israel. So as the church, we need to belong to Israel after those days. And this is the giving of my laws in their mind, and I shall write them on their hearts, and I shall be the Elohim, and they shall be my people. If we were living in those conditions where the laws were literally written on our mind and have them written on our hearts, then we would all be walking different. This earth would be different. We would be living out what we see in the context of Yirmiyahu 31 when we're giving that. And it isn't just them. Go to Ezekiel, once we have that resurrected body, once we are raptured, resurrected, gathered together, we will have a spiritual body. And literally, the laws will be written on our mind and written on our hearts. We will no longer struggle to keep his law, to keep his Torah, to keep his commands. It will be second nature to us. And it's at that time, over and over and over again throughout the prophets, it's at that time that I shall be their Elohim and they shall be my people. Now, it's fair to say for us believers, the remnant, that he's our Elohim and we are his people. Yeah, of course we identify with that. But in that day, I would say that what we're experiencing is much like what the gathering was from Babylon. It's a partial experience of the reality that is coming, because while we may be experiencing him as our Elohim and us as his people now, it is a far cry from what we will experience when the day comes, when the gathering comes, when the resurrection comes, when the promised land comes, when the reign of Elohim comes down on the earth and begins to become the law of the land. That's when the reality, the fullness of this promise shall be realized. Now let me go down to verse 13, which is the essence of this. And I don't know how, I know I missed it all my adult years, but in, I don't know, recent years, 3 or 4 years now, 2 or 3 years, I've seen this, and it just places all of this into its proper perspective. Because in verse 13, the author of Hebrews, whether it's Paul or another person, he says this: by saying renewed, or new, depending upon your version, by saying renewed, he has made the first old. Okay, we get it. The covenant that was made with Yisrael and with Moses will be old. It is the one that is passing away. It will not be the renewed covenant. It now has become, in context, the old covenant juxtaposed against the first, or the new renewed covenant. But let me go back. By saying renewed, he has made the first old. Now, what becomes old and growing aged is near disappearing. So at the time of this writing, which how many years after? This is after Messiah's death. And this is, if this is Paul, this is late in his career. So this has got to be 30, 40, 50, what? 60 years after Messiah's death. If we were living in the new covenant, it would have been initiated at the time of Messiah when I'm assuming at his resurrection, when he goes to take that place. Maybe it was his death. Maybe it was his birth. It doesn't really matter. It all would be in place. So we would not be saying that what becomes old and growing aged is near disappearing. We would be saying, so it would read like this. If we were living in that new covenant, and if the writer of Hebrews was living in that renewed or new covenant, it would have said something like this. By saying renewed, he made the first old, and it became old and grew aged and disappeared. That's how he would be talking. But at the time of this writing, he's not saying it's disappeared. He's saying it becomes old, excuse me, and is growing aged and is near disappearing. So it has not disappeared as of the time of this writing. So the old covenant, what we're calling the old covenant, which is the original covenant, the one made with the fathers at Mount Sinai, while it is considered old compared to the new one, we are not living in the new one yet. It has not yet come. It is a future event. And as we read all of Paul's writings, we're going to see a constant looking forward to this event. I will be doing some commentaries on Paul's writings where we're going to see when he refers to this promise, it's in the future. It's for a future event, and it has not occurred. So we are not living in the new or renewed covenant yet. We have it. Messiah has earned it. His blood bought it, and that has happened. And he is the mediator of it, and that's a true today thing. He is the author, the head of it all. He earned it. He won it. He's the king. He's the sovereign. He's the mediator. From him, all of this new covenant is going to flow, and he is that. But the new covenant has not come in its full reality yet. That new covenant, which is now being the Torah written on our heart, the foreskin of our flesh being cut away from our heart, our new spirit that is given to us, our new spiritual body that when we read Enoch and other passages, will sin no more. You know, when that all comes, that is the renewed covenant. That is the new covenant. Now, clearly, for everybody who wants to point to all of the things that has happened with the first coming of Messiah, which, by the way, since I'm not saying it elsewhere in this video, I'll say it right now. The major coming of Messiah is his second coming, because when he comes, it's not for 3 years, and it's not to come as a suffering servant. It is to come as the sovereign of the New Jerusalem, the sovereign of the reign of Elohim. And so that is the real coming of Messiah. The first one, he came to win, to work it out, to earn all of the things, all the foundational things that had to happen to bring about this new covenant. He came and he did. And with that come many gifts. I mean, I usually, when I begin speaking with somebody about, the idea that the new covenant is not yet, they begin speaking and pointing to things that they'll read in the new writings that are suggestive of the time has come and now is type things. Well, there are things that Messiah brought with this coming, this ministry of that Kodesh spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh. It came with him. It's come out. And now, while we live in this flesh and continue to live in this flesh before we die, and or are resurrected, before that, we've got this ministry of the set apart Kodesh, Ruach HaKodesh spirit to help us through this time. All these things are new and came with that first coming. And so there are many things that changed, but it is not the new covenant. And we're not living in the promises of that new covenant. If we are living now, if what we have lived in the last 2,000 years is the reality of the promise of the new covenant or the renewed covenant, then it's a sad promise. It is not. It is a sad, what we all hoped for has been dismal so far. We've lived a dismal failure throughout I mean, what period of time have we won? Has the church actually operated in the victory of the promises? They haven't. That victory is forthcoming. It is yet to come, which means the new covenant is yet to come. The fulfillment of the promise of the new covenant, the fulfillment of the promise of the renewed covenant is a future event, and it's not a current event. Okay. So with that, I guess I'll finish up here. I want to thank you for spending your time with me, and may you be Baruch.